Well, good morning and welcome to Managerial Accounting. We are looking at the calendar in Blackboard so we can see the due dates. I assume you guys still cannot see them on your own screens, right? That's still true. You're still not seeing them. Okay. So I'm just going to have to go with what's here. The suggestion was made that maybe it would be helpful to do a screenshot and share that. And I tried that, but as you can see, the assignments don't show up completely. So doing the screenshot didn't actually provide any useful information. So at this point, we're just going to have to go with, you're seeing those due dates in several other locations. They're in CNOW, they're on the syllabus, they are in the announcement that comes out every day after class. So please just rely on those and know that if I can figure out, or tech support can figure out for me why those dates are not showing up to you all, I will be happy to have that fixed. But at this point, I am not able to figure out why they're not showing because they always have. I don't know why the ones that are from CNOW are not showing up for you, because clearly I can see them, you can see them on my calendar. So we are going to be continuing our coverage of chapter 17 today, but we are not very far into the chapter yet. So there's a very reasonable chance that I will be needing to change the due date for the chapter 17 exercises. So toward the end of class, I will reevaluate where we are. And if it looks like we're not going to finish the exercises, I will take a moment and look at the problem to make sure that we will have covered everything that's in there. So we'll see at the end of class today what, if anything, will need to change, and that will be made clear, of course, during class, but also it will be in the announcement, and I will change the due dates in CNOW if needed. So before we get to today's new material, starting with exercise 3 in chapter 17, does anyone have any questions, anything you want to talk about from what we've already covered in chapter 17? So let's go then without any further delay. Let's get started with our new material because we do have a great deal to get through. And if possible, I would like to finish today, but I don't want this to be rushed because this is a challenging conversation. I would also remind you that in Blackboard, in the reference materials folder for this chapter, I showed you this last week, but there are a number of different resources or references for you in addition to what's in the videos. So there is the Excel cost of production report. I have that open. I will be referring to that today to show you how to use that, and you may want to download that to be able to use that on your own end. Also, I have a snip from the textbook. Excuse me, this is Exhibit 8 from the textbook, so it is right in your book, but I will be referring to this exhibit as we work through these exercises to show you how what we are doing matches up with what's in this example. In particular, I mentioned last class, I will refer to things by step number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Normally, I try to avoid those arbitrary steps, but I think they help us to see how it all works. And you have this exhibit here in the chapter 17 reference materials to serve as a reference. Last class, we talked about just a reminder, a review of how costs flow through the costing system for a manufacturing company. And we talked specifically about why a process cost system is similar, but also in some respects different than a company that uses a job order costing system, as we covered in chapter 16. So the main difference, of course, is that for a company that uses process costing, their reports cover a time period rather than a specific job. And so our reports will have headings like what I have here for the week, the month, the day, the quarter, the year, whatever. So it doesn't say this is job 62 or job 73 as you saw in chapter 16. So for that reason, we're going to be dealing with partial work, partially completed work. So we will almost always have beginning and ending balances that we have to take into account as we're looking at this work. Also, for a company that uses a process costing system, they will usually break up their work into separate departments or work cells or processes. And what makes this different than a job order costing system is they will almost always have more than one work in process account. So for a company that used job order costing, we saw that subsidiary ledger where they have separate job order cost cards for each one of the jobs that's in process at any given time, but only one work in process, which I refer to as the control or the master account, that was really the summary of all that stuff that's going on. For a company that uses process costing, they will have a separate work in process account, separate reporting, separate calculations of unit costs for each one of the processes. And as I told you last class, as we introduced this chapter, we, for the purpose of simplification for this class, we will only be looking at the first step in the process, or for a very simple organization, the only step in the process. The reason we do that is so that we don't have to deal with those transferred in costs, but I don't want you to be misled. The vast majority of companies have more than one step. And so if you think about it, let's say we have 4 steps in our process, like that cookie factory that we were talking about last class. If we have 4 steps in the process, 3 of those 4 steps are going to have transferred in costs. So I just want you to keep that in mind, that we are making this a little bit less complicated, but in the majority of cases in a real world scenario, you're going to have those transferred in costs that need to be included in your cost report. So that's my summary of what we have already covered for this chapter. We completed exercises 1 and 2 together last class, and we'll be picking up with exercise 3. Before we turn to this exercise though, does anyone have any questions, anything you want to talk about? Okay. So as you can see, our first exercise for today is titled Equivalent Units of Production. And so I just want to give you a very brief explanation of what we mean by equivalent units. What is an equivalent unit? And here's the example I usually use. This coming Sunday is a big sporting event day, and I'm not referring to the Olympics. It is Super Bowl Sunday, right? So those of you who are football fans, even though unfortunately the Bills will not be in that game, maybe you're still excited about it, maybe. And so are you just a football fan, or you just like an excuse for a party? And so you decide to invite some friends over, and because you have friends coming over and it is a football game, you decide you're going to get some pizzas. And so you call your local pizzeria and you order, let's say 10 pizzas. And because you're not sure who's going to show up, you get a variety of different toppings. You get just a plain cheese and some pepperoni, and you have some weird friends, and so you get the Hawaiian ham and pineapple pizza. Why would you do that? Why would you invite those weird friends? But you don't know who's going to show up. So you got 10 pizzas. You've got televisions set up around the house. You got one in the living room, one in your man cave. or she shed or whatever you have, one out in the garage, and people are just kind of milling around because I don't know, maybe some people want to watch the Olympics and so you don't have the game on every channel. I don't know. And then the game ends and everyone goes home and you are left with pizzas spread around the house. Every place that there people were congregating, there's a pizza and it's in some state of consumption. So you just go around, you bring all those pizza boxes back to the kitchen. And now you have all 10 pizza boxes sitting on the kitchen counter. And if it's like my house, you know, the pizza box will not fit in the refrigerator because it's too big. Like, really? Do I have 10 pizzas left? No, you don't have 10 pizzas left because people have been eating them, right? So you open the lid of each one. You say, all right, let's pretend that each pizza was cut into 8 slices just to make it easy. So we open the lid of one and the box is completely empty. Okay, throw that one over to the side. We're going to get rid of that. And you just go about opening the rest of the 9 pizzas. And you get 2 slices here and 3 slices there. And the Hawaiian pizza is still whole because those weird friends didn't show up at all. And what are you going to do? You've got 9 boxes of pizza, all in various, all at various levels of consumption. Some have 2 pieces, some have 8. What are you going to do? Are you going to still take all 9 pizza boxes and try to fit them into your refrigerator? Or what are you going to do? You're going to combine them. You're going to take the 2 slices out of this box and the 3 slices out of that box and the 3 slices out of the other box. And it's okay that some might be pepperoni and some might be cheese. We're going to put them all together. And those 3 boxes that had 2, 3, and 3 slices become one whole pizza as far as our boxes are concerned. Everyone understand where I'm going with this, right? You can picture this in your head. You know what that looks like. Those 3 partial pizzas that I just described became one equivalent whole pizza. That is exactly what we are doing here. We have beginning inventory that's partially complete. We are going to finish up that work. Remember, we discussed last class for our purposes, we are going to be using, and I'll put this on the screen as a reminder, we are going to be, whoops, not there. We are going to be using first out or FIFO. And so we have beginning inventory because we're a going concern and we are not reporting on specific jobs, we're reporting on time periods. So just because it's the first day of the week or first day of the month doesn't mean we don't have anything in process. We're going to have some product that is partially completed. And because we're using the first in, first out method, the first thing we do in our accounting records, now this may not actually be what happens, and just like we discussed in chapter 6 in financial accounting, it's okay. We're talking about the cost of flow through our inventory records, the flow of cost through our accounting records. We are not talking about what actually happens. It's okay if we use a liquid process and so everything kind of runs together. That's fine. We still have to make an assumption about what happens in our accounting records. And because we are using first in, first out, the assumption is the first thing we do is finish up those partially completed units. To calculate equivalent units of production, which is what we're doing in this exercise, we are taking those partially finished pizzas and figuring out how much more do we need to finish up that pizza, and we're going to express it as equivalent whole units. We might have 2 pieces and 3 pieces and 3 pieces. We're going to say that's equivalent to one whole pizza. Okay, so that's really all we are doing here, is taking the partial units and packing them together so that they are a neater number for us to deal with and calculating equivalent whole units. Okay, so let me get rid of that so I can scroll down. So let's look at our exercise. Now that you hopefully have a better understanding of what it even means to be an equivalent unit. It's how many whole units would this be if we took all the partials and stuck them together? How many whole units would that be equal to or equivalent to? this exercise says data for the two departments of Kimball and Pierce Company for June of the current fiscal year are as follows. So you can see we have two departments, the drawing department and the winding department. I'm assuming that's winding, not winding. Thank you, English language. So we're going to start with the drawing department. And you can see in the drawing department, we have 10,000 units that were in process at the beginning of the period. 10,000 whole units. Now remember last class, we had Alexis's rule. Does anyone remember what Alexis's rule was about direct materials?
So toss everything all in at the start.
Exactly. So when we make cookies or when we make whatever it is we're making in this business, we are assuming that the first thing we do is throw all of the direct materials into the pot, so to speak, and then we start stirring. Then we start mixing it up. We are going to be using that simplifying assumption for everything we do. And so when we say in this drawing department that at the beginning of the month we had 10,000 units already in process, that means all the direct materials were added back in May, right? This is June. We don't have to add any direct materials in June because they were already added in May. Alexis threw everything in the bowl before we started. At the end of May, those units then had all the direct materials, but only part of the conversion cost. So there's that word again that we first learned in chapter 15, and I said, hold on to it. We won't be using it until chapter 17. So here we are, chapter 17. Conversion costs include the cost to take the direct materials and turn them into a finished product. So included in that conversion cost are our direct labor and our overhead. We are told here that these units at the beginning of June, they were already 38% complete. So if they were already 38% complete at the beginning of June, remember, first in, first out, the first thing we're going to do is finish those units. How much work did we have to do? What percentage of the work was left to be completed in June? 62%. They were already 38% complete at the beginning of June. We had 62% more of the work of the conversion costs left to be added to finish those units. Does everyone see that? Okay. So 10,000 units, think of it as 10,000 pizzas if that helps. We have 10,000 pizzas, but we only need to do 62% of the work. 62% of 10,000 pizzas would be equivalent to 6,200 whole pizzas. It's 6,200 whole units or equivalent units worth of work, worth of conversion costs left to be added to finish up those units. Does everyone see that? Is there anyone who's, and I know you guys on Zoom know I can't see you, so you'll need to speak up or post in the chat if you have a question about that. Otherwise, the whole burden goes to the people in the classroom because I can actually see them and make eye contact. Okay. During the month of June, it tells us that we completed and transferred out 60,000 units. 10,000 of those units were started in May, and we finished those up. So of the 60,000 units that were completed in June, for our next line here, 10,000 weren't started in June. So that means 50,000 were started in June and finished in June, right? Started and completed. And that means 60,000 were transferred to the next department, transferred to the winding or the winding department. I don't know what winding would be, but it's a reasonable pronunciation of that word. Okay. For the 50,000 units that were started and completed in June, when we started them, we added all the direct materials, 50,000 units worth. And we did all of the work because they were started and completed. So when we transferred those 60,000 units, we moved for these units that were finished this month, 50,000 direct materials were added this month. Where did the other 10,000 come from? They were added in May. Those costs are still going to be transferred out, but those were not new costs this month. And for these units, how many units worth of conversion costs were incurred? Again, I'm just adding 56,200. 6,200 equivalent units worth of conversion cost to finish up the beginning inventory. We do that first because we're using first in, first out. And then 50,000 more to complete those last units. At the end of the month, there were 11,500 units still in process. How do I know that? It's right here. There were 11,500 whole units still in process. Now, Alexis's rule tells us that all the direct materials have been added for those. As soon as we started working on them, we threw in all the direct materials. Then we started doing the work. And it tells us that these units were 70% completed. Those units were started this month. So if they're 70% completed, we did 70% of the work. 70% of, when you hear the word of, think times, think multiplication. 70% times 11,500 is 8,050 equivalent whole units worth of conversion work were added to those units. Now we can just add to get our totals. So these are the total costs that were added during this month. 64,250 units of conversion work, direct labor and overhead combined, and 61,500 equivalent units of direct materials. Any questions about what I've done up to this point? Letter B says, if all direct materials are placed in process at the beginning of, oh, yep, Sharon?
Sorry.
That's okay. I love when people use that rate because it actually pops up on my screen. Sharon raised her hand. Go ahead.
I was just trying to figure out how to comment because it's been a while. Sorry about that.
Okay. That's okay. So you're good?
Yes.
Okay. I really love that though when people use that. I'm perfectly fine to interrupt me, but some people feel more comfortable not doing that, right? So let's move on to part B then. If all direct materials are placed in process at the beginning of the period, determine the direct materials and conversion equivalent units of production for June for the winding department. So we already said, and this is Alexis's rule, all direct materials are placed in process at the beginning of production. So let's look at what happened in the winding department. We had at the beginning of the month 4,000 units that were 35% complete. Those units came from the drawing department in May. So they started out, they moved from the drawing department into the winding department in May. That's why they're still in process in the winding department in June. They were finished in the drawing department. They moved into the winding department. They were doing whatever they needed to do to wind them up. Whatever they're doing, I have no idea. And so what we're accounting for here is a whole separate work in process inventory account for the winding department. What we calculated here for the drawing department is really independent of what we calculate here. Here, we're only paying attention to what happened in the winding department. Any direct materials that had to be added in the winding department for this beginning inventory were added during May. And so we don't add any more direct materials, but we still need to finish up these units. At the beginning of the month, these units were 35% complete. So how much more work needed to be done in the month of June? If they're 35% complete, they must have 65% left to do. 65% of 4,000 is equivalent to 2,600 whole units. There were a total of 60,500 units transferred out. The winding department is the last step in the process, apparently. And so once we're done with those units, they are transferred to finished goods. So just like we discussed in chapter 16 for job order costing, the basic flow is materials to work in process to finished goods to cost of goods sold. The difference is when we use process costing, there might be multiple steps, multiple work in process accounts. But it tells us that 60,500 were transferred to finished goods. Tells us this right here, completed and transferred to the next step during June, 60,500. 4,000 of those were from beginning inventory, so it must be that 56,500 were started and completed. Because they were started and completed this month, we incurred all of the costs. We added all the direct materials, we did all of the conversion work. What happened next? We also then at the end of the month started some additional units that we have not completed. They're still in ending inventory. 3,500 units that were 60% completed. So 3,500 whole units. Alexis's rule tells us add all the direct materials. As soon as we started those units, throw all the direct materials into the process. 3,500. But the conversion work was 60% completed. All of that 60% was done this month because we just started these units this month. So 60% of 3,500 is equivalent to 2,100 whole units worth of conversion costs. Any questions at this point? We'll practice with this again, but any questions about calculating equivalent units? This line right here? Okay, yep. So we were told here that there were 4,000 units in beginning inventory and they were already 35% complete. So if we did 35% of the work in May, we had 65% left to do in June to finish them, right? So 65% of or times 4,000 units is where that 2,600 comes from. So remember, I told you there were 4 steps in the process cost report. Showed you right here. What we have just done is steps 1 and 2. steps 1 and 2, you'll notice we didn't talk anything about money. Everything we did in steps 1 and 2 were units. Whole units, equivalent units. Steps 1 and 2 are units only. We're figuring out how many units of work were done for direct materials and for conversion costs in the period that we're reporting on. So in our template that I showed you, and I told you we'll be using this, and I think we'll use it in this next exercise here, I think that'll make sense for us. The top part, so what you're seeing on the screen right now, this is steps 1 and 2. Units only, okay? Let's move on if there aren't any questions, but please feel free to stop me if you have questions. Let me see, maybe. I think it will be easier for us. I think it will be easier for us to see if we use the template that I have provided to do what's here, because we're going to calculate these five answers. If we plug it into the template, the information is given. I think it's just going to be easier for us to see how to calculate it rather than trying to write all these calculations out on the screen. It will be easier for us to keep track if we use the template. So as I said at the beginning of class, I'm going to be using the template. I'm going to be plugging my numbers in. You are welcome on your end if it's easier for you to just follow along with what I'm doing, or in Blackboard, right here is the link to that actual Excel template. You are welcome to download that and use it at the same time that I am, if you find that more helpful. But I prefer the flow, the organization of the information that we'll be able to use on this template, and it does mirror what's in that Exhibit 8 that I showed you from the book. So let's go ahead and get started. I have a printout of the exercise here that I'm going to be referring to, but if you tell me you really need me to be jumping back and forth so that you can see exactly where the information comes from, just say that. Otherwise, I will stay on this template to avoid the back and forth movement. So just tell me if you're unsure where, if I say a number and you're unsure where it came from, I'll be happy to show you. So in exercise 4, we're given a kind of a printout from the accounting system of that work in process for the baking department. So this company probably has other steps in the process. Each one would have its own work in process account. We are only reporting on what happened in the baking department. And it tells us so this is for the month of December. As of December 1st, it says the balance was 24,000 units. 24,000 units is what we had in beginning inventory. 24,000 units in beginning inventory. That means those units were started. So this is, I'm not going to change the heading, but it should, this template would say for the month ended December 31st, whatever year. So this right here would be adjusted to reflect what we're actually reporting. So we started 24,000 units last month in November, and at the beginning of the month, they're 3 quarters completed. 3 quarters or 75%. Alexis's rule tells us we don't have to add any direct materials to those. The direct materials are already in there. We added them in November when we started those units. But they were 3 quarters completed, so we had 1 quarter or 25% of the work left to do. 1 quarter or 25% of 24,000 would be 6,000 equivalent whole units. We have 24,000 pizza boxes, each had a quarter of the work. And we're sticking them all together to see how many whole pizzas, that's 6,000 whole pizzas. Everybody good with that part? On the next line of the exercise, it tells us direct materials were added of 134,000 units. Those are the units we started this period. And so during the period, we were working on a total of 158,000 units. And I apologize, I don't have commas in there. Apparently I didn't do a great job of formatting my template here. 158,000 units we were working on. Skipping down then to the second to the bottom line. It tells us that goods finished 128,000 units. Those units were finished and transferred out. Of those 128,000 units that we finished and transferred out, 24,000 were in the beginning inventory already. So that means we must have started and completed another 104,000. That's how math works, right? We had 24,000 in beginning inventory. We started and completed another 104,000. So 128,000 in total were transferred out. For those units we started and completed, we did all the work. We incurred all of the cost. We added all the direct materials, 100%. And I'm just putting in my totals. So during the period, we already did here in step 1, during the period we started 134,000 units. Of those units, we completed 104,000. So we started 134, we started and completed 104,000. So it must be that there were 30,000 units that we started but did not complete. These two numbers right here, 158,000, 158,000, those two numbers need to be the same. Got a little bit of a check figure in there, if you will. Of the 30,000 units in ending inventory, Alexis's rule tells us we add all of the direct materials when we start those units, and then we incur the conversion costs as we do the work. In the exercise, the last line of that little table tells us the ending balance, which we now know was 30,000 units. There's a question mark in our exercise, but we just figured out it's 30,000. Those were half done, one half completed. We did 15,000 units worth of the work. And the other half, the other 15,000, will get done in January. So those are steps 1 and 2. That's what we just did in the previous exercise, and now we have done it for exercise 4. Is everybody okay with what we've done so far? Okay. Now we're going to see the next steps. Steps 3 and 4. Step 3 is this part. Okay. So this is step 3. In step 3, we're bringing together the dollar amounts and the units that we just calculated in step 2. So we're going to bring in the dollar amounts that we have in the exercise, and then we're gonna bring in the units from step 2. So let's look at those dollar amounts that were given in the exercise. This line, you'll notice, says total costs incurred this period for direct materials. It's the second line in the information that's given in the exercise. We added or debited $234,500 to our work in process for the direct materials. How many units was that for? Well, right here in step 2, we said we added 134,000 units. I don't know why that has a double underline under it. Ignore that. Should not be a double underline. 134,000 units of direct materials were added at a cost of $234,500. So I'm going to use the functionality of Excel to do the work for me. 234,500 divided by 134,000 units is equivalent to $1.75 per unit. Make sense so far? We know that our conversion costs include both direct labor and overhead. So if I look at the next 2 lines in the exercise, the given information, direct labor added was $150,000. And the next line down says we added $375,000 worth of overhead. A total of $525,000 worth of conversion costs were added to our work in process account during the period. How many units was that for? It's right here in cell E, can't tell what that is, E16. Total units to be assigned costs, 125,000 conversion cost units. That has the correct underline, just a single underline there. And so that's equivalent to $4.20 per per conversion cost unit. $4.20 per unit for conversion cost. Everybody see where that came from?
Where was the 525 from?
It was the total of the direct labor and the overhead. So if I go back to the exercise, so it's this line right here, they added 150 in direct labor. And here they added or debited to that account 375 for overhead. Everybody good so far? The last part here of step 3 is a cost summary. So costs assigned to production. What did we have in beginning work in process? Well, if you look up at, again, at the given information, the first line is our beginning balance, and the work in process account had $116,700 already in there. Where did those costs come from? Well, those are the costs from November. That would include the direct materials for the units that were in process at the beginning of the month, which was 24,000 units. So that would include all of their direct materials and part 75% of their conversion cost, direct labor and overhead. Total cost added during this period, well, we added $234,500 for direct materials, and we added $150,000 in direct labor, $375,000 in overhead, for a total of $759,500. That should not have a dollar sign on there. I apparently need to do some editing on my template. Here I thought I had the greatest template. And then I'm just adding those together. So total cost to be accounted for includes the beginning inventory plus everything that was added. And if we look at what was given, we know that we're on track here because there is that same number. That's what was in the account, in the work in process account, before we moved the part that we finished. So that's step 3. cost summary, oops, go away. Cost summary, and we calculated the cost per unit for the costs that were incurred this month. Everybody good? Let's go ahead then with step 4, the final step. Beginning work in process had $116,700 in there already. That was given. If I go back up here to my step 2, right here. What I have, it's row 12 in my template. Because we're using the FIFO method, first in, first out, at least from our accounting perspective, regardless of what happens out in the factory, from our accounting perspective, the first thing we do is finish up those beginning inventory units. So what did we have to add? What cost did we incur to finish those? Well, Alexis tells us we don't have to add any direct materials. So you'll notice column C here is the direct materials column, and column E is the conversion cost column, okay? I could probably just do this. Maybe it's hard for me to see all of my tools here. Give me a second. Okay, and I'll be able to keep that there. Now we'll be able to, oh, I could have just left that one. Right. Okay, so cost to complete beginning inventory. Column C is for direct materials. We didn't have to add any direct materials. Column E is for the conversion cost. And in row 12, we calculated we needed 6,000 more units, equivalent whole units of conversion costs. And in step 3, we calculated the cost per unit to be $4.20. So the cost to complete that beginning inventory, I'm just using the numbers I already have in the template. Oops, hang on, sorry. Try it again. 6,000 units from step 2 times or at $4.20 per unit from step 3. We added a total of $25,200 worth of conversion costs to finish up those units. So the total cost for the beginning inventory, $141,900. I'm just going to do a quick calculation here. Remember, we had 24,000 units in beginning inventory. So if we had $141,900 divided by 24,000 units, that's an average cost of $5 and rounding off 91 cents per unit, $5.91 per unit. The fact that we're using the FIFO method means that the beginning inventory could have a different cost than the units started and completed this month. Remember, I told you last class, there's an appendix to this chapter that deals with the weighted average cost method. And I told you you're not responsible for that, but that I did want you to be aware that it exists, that not every company uses the FIFO method that we are using here. What makes the average cost method different is we do not separate the beginning inventory. We average it in. So any unit completed this month under the weighted average cost method would have the same cost. Because we use FIFO, we separate out that beginning inventory. We assume we complete that first. And so these 24,000 units could have a different cost per unit. This is the cost per unit for this month, $1.75 and $4.20. That's a total of $5.95. And yes, I did just look at my calculator to see that total. That's kind of pathetic. $5.95 per unit was the cost for December. $5.91 was the cost for the ones that were started in November and completed in December. They don't always have a different cost. The cost isn't always higher in a subsequent month. Could be lower, could be exactly the same. The point is, when we're using FIFO, those costs can be different for the beginning inventory and the units started and completed, which is what we're going to do next. Any questions about where we are right now, though? Anybody with questions? Okay, so let's go back up to our step 2 and take a look at the units started and completed. That's this row, row 13. And in step 2, we calculated that there were 104,000 units that we started and completed. For those 104,000 units, we're going to be using these costs that we calculated in step 3. Okay, so 104,000 units. And I'm going to use cell reference for these calculations rather than typing it in myself. It's just easier. 104,000 units at $1.75 each for the direct materials, and 104,000 units from step 2 at $4.20 from step 3. And so now we have a total for those units that were started and completed. We already know it's $5.95 per unit. And because some information was given to us in this exercise, we have a nice little way of checking what we've already done. Total cost transferred out. That includes the cost for the beginning inventory and the units started and completed. And if we go back to the exercise, here's that number. That's the amount that we transferred out. Where did we transfer it? The next step in the process or to finished goods. I don't know. I don't know that it tells us what happens next for these units. In my example that we talked about last class, the cookie factory, the next step after baking would be packaging. And maybe that's where these go. Maybe this is an actual cookie shop and they just, once they're baked, they put them out on the rack and they're for sale. They don't have to do any packaging. I don't know. Doesn't matter for us because the only thing that we are doing is the baking department. Everybody with me so far? The next line is ending inventory. And so that's row 15 from step 2. We had 30,000 units in ending inventory. We had added all 30,000 units of direct materials because Alexis said to do it that way. And we added 15,000 units of conversion costs. 30,000 units at $1.75 for direct materials, plus 15,000 units of conversion costs at $4.20. Add across to get those total costs. $115,500 will be our ending inventory. That balance transfers over then to become the beginning inventory of January or for January. And then we'll finish up those units. But the cost per unit for those costs to finish up could be different in January because maybe minimum wage went up and so we had to pay our workers more. Maybe raises kicked in the first of the year. Maybe, I don't know, any number of reasons. Maybe our overhead just went up. Could happen. Could go down, really. But one more way of checking ourselves. This number right here in cell G29, total cost to be accounted for at the end of step 3 must be equal to the total cost accounted for. So in step 3, we said we need to account for $876,200. And at the end of step 4, yep, we accounted for them. We know where all those costs are at the end of the period. We know what was transferred out, $618,800 to the next step in the process, whatever that is. And we know what's still in the account for ending inventory. Anybody with questions about what I did in this template, what we were calculating, where any of these numbers come from, before we go back to the exercise, and we'll be able to answer the questions that are asked. Just trust me when I tell you doing all this first is going to make the exercise super easy, because we now have all the information we need to answer these questions. And it's much more straightforward, much easier to picture it when you actually use that template, rather than trying to calculate these separately without having that format or that structure to your calculations. So let's go ahead and answer our questions. Number one, and it asks us to round to the nearest cent for the per equivalent unit calculations. The others will round to the nearest dollar if we need to. Direct material cost per equivalent unit. Right here. Direct material cost per equivalent unit, $1.75. Conversion cost per equivalent unit, right next to it. $4.20 per equivalent unit. Next, cost of the beginning work in process completed during December. Right here. Total cost for beginning inventory. That includes the costs that were added in November, plus the cost to complete that work at the beginning of December. $141,900. Cost of units started and completed during December. Cost for units started and completed. Next line, $618,800. Cost of the ending work in process, right here. Cost for ending work in process, $115,500. Everybody with me? I already did the calculation, and we know that the units in beginning inventory cost about $5.91 each. And for the units started and completed during the month, it cost $5.95 each. So with that, we can answer question B. Assuming that the direct material cost is the same, did the conversion cost equivalent unit increase, decrease, or remain the same? So if direct material stayed the same, but the total cost went up, then it must be the conversion cost that increased, right? The total cost increased. One part of it, direct materials, didn't increase, so it must have been the other part, the conversion cost, that did increase. So when you first looked at this exercise and you saw, oh, it's just 5 questions and we'd have to answer 5 questions, it might have seemed like it was going to be, pretty straightforward. But please believe me that putting it in the template helps you to see where everything fits together and to do these calculations. Why I put together the template, even though I have some formatting issues, I created this template to be helpful. Please use it. Please use it as needed for any exercises, for the homework problem, on the exam, if you need to do something like this, which you will. You will find this template helpful. If you're only doing equivalent units, steps 1 and 2, maybe you don't need the template. We didn't need it for the first exercise we did. But it is vastly helpful for bringing in the costs to see how everything works. Does anyone have any questions you want to ask before we move on to our next exercise? I am actually going to dump this template and just open a new one rather than trying to delete the stuff I don't need, because I'm going to use the template again for our next exercise. Everybody good so far? Exercise 5 says, Georgia Products Incorporated completed and transferred 89,000 particle board units of production from the pressing department. There was no beginning inventory in process in the department. The ending in process inventory was 2,400 units, which were 3/5 complete as to conversion cost. All materials are added at the beginning of the process, following Alexis's rule. Direct materials cost incurred was, direct labor was, overhead was. Okay. So we don't need to fill out the whole template, but I'm going to fill in some of it to help us with this. So I'm going to go to the template and make this, whoops, make this a little bigger. So from what I just read, I'm going to enter the information in the template. We had no beginning inventory. 89,000 units were started, whoops, sorry, 89,000 were completed. Scratch that. 89,000 were completed and transferred out, and ending inventory was 2,400 units. So 89,000 completed and transferred out, 2,400 left. Total of 91,400 units. No beginning inventory. $89,000 were started and completed, so we added all of the direct materials. I hope you're trying this on your own as we go through it. And there were 2,400 units in ending inventory. Those units would have all the direct materials, but it says they're 3/5 complete. 3/5 or 60% of 2,400 is 1,440. So I got 91,400 units of direct materials, 90,440 units of conversion costs. And the questions are actually about the conversion cost. Oh no, it has direct material, question about direct materials as well. Everybody with me so far? It gives us the direct materials cost, $219,360. The conversion cost it gives separately, the direct labor of $28,100 and the overhead of $12,598. We get the units from step 2, and then we can find our cost per equivalent unit by dividing. And actually, that is all we need for this exercise. It doesn't ask us to do step 4. So we can stop right there. We have all the information we need to answer these questions. We have all the information we need to complete step 4 as well, but we don't need to do that for this exercise. So total conversion cost was, total conversion cost is here. Total conversion cost, $40,698. Then the conversion cost per unit, which was the 45 cents, and the direct materials cost per unit of $2.40. And that's all we needed to do for this exercise. Probably could have done that without using the template. I think it's helpful and a good habit to use the template. Makes it simpler to see what's happening. All right, everybody good? Anyone who has questions before we keep going? For this one, for the next exercise, again, I want to use the template. Open a clean new one. Actually, for this, because we didn't do the whole thing, I can probably just delete here. Yeah, that's simple enough. Okay. Exercise 6. We're given a T account. Information provided there is very similar to what was provided in our 4th exercise. Is everyone feeling comfortable with this? Would you like to try this one on your own, or should we do this one again together? No opinion? Okay. Yep. Yep, that's fine. So let's try this one together. So looking at our T account, again, I have it printed out in front of me, so I'm not going to jump back and forth, but if you're not sure where I'm getting a number, please just ask. I'll be happy to show you in the actual exercise. Oops. In the T account, on the debit side, we have the opening balance. It was 9,000 units in beginning inventory. And the next line tells us that they added direct materials for another 40,000 units. So during the month, we were working on a total of 49,000 units. And when we finish step 2 here, that total must be 49,000 units. In step 2, our job is to say, okay, where are they now? The first thing we do is finish up the beginning inventory. Alexis's rule tells us don't add any more direct materials. They're all in from the previous period. But the opening balance tells us that those 9,000 beginning inventory units were 40% complete already at the beginning of the month. So if they were already 40% complete, how much more work did we need to do? Hopefully you're saying to yourself, well, it must be 60%. They were 40% done. We need to do the rest, 60%. 60% of or times 9,000 whole units is equivalent to 54,000 units. We needed to do 5,400, 5,400 more units worth of work. It tells us on the credit side of the T account that they moved 41,500 units to finished goods. Well, 9,000 of those units that were finished started in beginning inventory. So 41,500, 9,000 were in beginning inventory. That means 32,500 were started and completed this period. Because we were told that 41,500 were transferred out. 9,000 of those were already in beginning inventory. So the other 32,500 must have been started and completed, which means we incurred all of the costs. We added all the direct materials. We did all of the work. It's just the total of the two numbers right above it, the beginning inventory units plus the units started and completed. So we had 49,000 units that we were working on. And of those units, 41,500 were completed, which means 7,500 must have been still in ending inventory. I don't know if Alexis is tired of hearing her name, but Alexis's rule tells us, I did warn you last class, Alexis's rule tells us we add all the direct materials at the beginning of the process. But then we incur the conversion costs throughout the work. We know those units weren't done because they're still in ending inventory. And the ending balance, the debit, the total, the last line of the T account tells us the ending balance was 30% complete. Those units were started this month and we did 30% of the work. 30% of or times 7,500 is equivalent to 2,250 units of conversion work, equivalent units. And then we just need to put in our totals. Maybe what I should do, find time to think of this now. I think what I will do for this exercise is just save this template at the end and I'll upload this template to the reference materials so people can look at it later, including if you're interested, you can see what my formulas are. That would probably be helpful. So I'll plan to save this template.
Would it be helpful for this to create some formulas?
In the template, yes, but I don't want to do that because I want you to see how to do it. I don't want you to depend on the formulas being there. So yes, it would be helpful to get it done, but I don't know if it would be helpful for long-term understanding. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I get it for this, like homework, if I want to go in.
Yeah, so what you could do is even open my template and just take out the numbers and leave in the formulas. That you would be welcome to do that once I load this sheet. You can use it however you would like. Any questions about steps 1 and 2 for this exercise? So let's go down to step 3 then. Total costs incurred during this period. So we're looking at the debits that were added to the account. For direct materials, it was $272,000. And then we have separate lines for direct labor of $80,000 and overhead of $40,450. Our units come from step 2, units for the period for direct materials and for conversion costs. Then we simply need to divide to find our cost per unit. Cost summary at the end of step 3. Beginning work in process is the beginning balance in our T account, $72,360, plus what we added to it, direct materials and conversion costs. Anyone with questions at this point? So our beginning work in process, the beginning balance in that T account was $72,360. Because we're using the FIFO method, the first thing we do is finish up those units. And in row 12, we can see that we didn't add any more direct materials. We already knew that would be the case, but we added 5,400 units of conversion costs. 5,400 units to finish the beginning inventory at $3 each. Oops. Then for the units started and completed. Row 13, 32,500 units were started and completed. So we need to add 32,500 units of direct materials at $6.80 each. Plus 32,500 units of conversion costs at $3 each. Simply multiplying the units from step 2. Oops, here, not multiply there. The units from step 2 and the cost per unit from step 3. Unlike in the fourth exercise, we are not given the dollar amount that was transferred out, so I can't check myself at this point, but that's okay. Last step, cost for ending work in process. That's going to be the units from line 15, 7,500 in direct materials, 2,250 for conversion cost, times the cost per unit from row 24. Units from row 15, cost per unit from row 24. And now we have a way of checking to make sure that we have at least allocated all of the costs, because these total costs accounted for at the end of step 4 must match the total cost to be accounted for at the end of step 3. And that gives us a good sense that we may have done this correctly. Anyone with questions about what we have done up to this point? And as I said, I will, at the end of class, I will load this completed template that I just saved. I will load it into the reference materials folder, so you're welcome to access it there. I have used formulas every place I can so that you can see where those numbers are coming from. And you are welcome, if you would like, to use this to complete other assignments, including the homework or on the exam, with the formulas already in there. I would just caution you to be super careful that you delete all of the numbers that I've typed in and leave only the formulas before you even start, so you don't get confused about which numbers go with this problem and which numbers go with another problem you might be using. Because I can just imagine that happening. I can imagine me doing that, thinking, oh, I'll just take them out one at a time and then missing one. So please don't do that. Let's go back to our exercise then and see if we can answer all of our questions. Well, look at that. They've already given us the cost per equivalent unit. However, we know where those came from. We were able to calculate those. So I feel pretty confident that what we've done is correct. Not that I do feel confident. Number 1, cost of beginning work in process completed this period. We're just going to be pulling these numbers directly from our template we've already completed. Total cost for beginning inventory, $88,560. It includes what was already in beginning inventory, plus the conversion cost to complete those units. Cost of units transferred to finished goods during this period, total cost transferred out, $407,060. That number, cost of units transferred to finished goods, that number includes the beginning inventory and the units started and completed. Cost of ending work in process, right here, next line down, $57,750. Cost per unit of the completed beginning work in process inventory. So I haven't done this yet, but I will do it right now, and I will put it on the screen. Find my annotate here. So where did that come? Where does this come from? Well, from number one, we answered here, the cost of the beginning inventory was $88,560. We already answered that. From the exercise, the beginning inventory was 9,000 units. And it says round to the nearest cent, $9.84. $9.84. We already calculated in our template. They actually gave it to us. Here's the cost from this month. $6.80 for direct materials, $3 for conversion costs, a total of $9.80. So did the production cost change from the previous period? The answer is yes. They went down, right? They went from 984 down to 980. Letter C says, assume the direct materials didn't change. So it must be the conversion cost that changed. And how did they change? They decreased. They decreased by 4 cents per unit based on these calculations. To 980. So right here, we have this in our template, but it's also right here for us. They actually gave it to us. We calculated it, but so it went from 984 to 980. Make sense? Everyone feel comfortable with how to use the template? If you don't find the template helpful, you don't have to use the template. There is never going to be a time that I require you to submit your completed template so that I can check it. That's not going to happen. If you get stuck on something and you've done the template and want to send it to me so I can look at it and kind of guide you back in the right direction, I'm happy to do that. But if you don't find the template helpful, which I would think would be surprising, but if you don't find the template helpful, you don't have to use it. It's one tool that I'm giving you if you find it helpful. I personally find it very helpful. If you don't use it. It's okay. Any questions about where we are now? Let's keep going then. So what we have here is actually basically the template. And so I don't think we need to use the template for this exercise because it's really provided for us in that same format. The only advantage to using the template I can see here is that you have Excel. You can put in formulas where we can't do that in this template that's in the exercise. But I am not going to use the template for exercise 7. Again, if you find it helpful, please feel free to use it. And then just come put your answers in here. But given that you have to enter all of it here, I'm not sure it would be terribly helpful. All right. So looking at what's given at the top of the exercise 7, we have the cost of production report. We're given information about the units and the dollars for beginning inventory. We're given units and dollars for what was added during the month, and then some information about ending work in process and what was transferred out. So what we are going to be doing in this exercise is completing this cost of production report. Again, it's just like the template. The formatting is virtually identical. It may look a little bit different in the positioning, but all of the calculations are going to be the same. We have step 1 here in these first 3 rows, step 2, step 3, and then step 4. Excuse me. So let's get started with this. Remember, steps 1 and 2 are units only. It notes here unit information. Please do not try to put any dollar amounts into the steps 1 and 2 units, and then we get to cost information in step 3 and step 4. So let's look at our units. At the beginning of the month, we had 700 pounds already in process. And during the month, they added another 14,300 pounds. That's all we need to know for step 1. During the month, we were working on a total of 15,000 pounds of direct materials. Remember, we're using the FIFO method, so the first thing we have to do is finish up that beginning inventory. We had 700 pounds already in process, and it told us that those were 20% completed. 20% of the work was done in July, so 80% was left to be done in August. Alexis's rule tells us we don't need to add any more direct materials, but we do have to do 80% of the work. 700 units times 80% is equivalent to 560 whole units of conversion cost. Right here, it tells us that we completed 14,600 pounds of coffee during the month of August. So that's this number right here, finished, transferred to finished goods. 14,600 pounds. 700 pounds of that was the beginning inventory, so must be 13,900 were started and completed. If those units were started and completed, we added all the direct materials, we did all of the work. And I'm just putting in my totals on the next line. Transferred to finished goods. 14,600 pounds. We incurred 13,900 units of direct materials cost and 14,460 units of conversion cost during the month of August. Uh-huh. Yep, that will always be the case. So if the units were started and completed, all the cost will be in this month. So we'll always have, for the units started and completed, we'll always have all of the direct materials, all the conversion costs, because we worked on them this month only. Did that answer your question? Yep, so those numbers will always be the same across there. How about the ending work in process? Well, it tells us here that at the end of the month, we still had 400 pounds in process, and those were 42% complete. So 400 pounds. Alexis tells us throw all the direct materials in, 400 units of direct materials, but then we had done 40% sorry, 42% of the work. 42% times 400 is, whoops, 168 units. I've already pointed out to you these two numbers need to be the same. The total units to be accounted for from step 1 and the units that we actually accounted for at the end of step 2. Those two numbers must always be the same. Uh-huh. Yep. So that's a good question. We have to be very careful how we read it, what it's telling us. So at the beginning of the month, for example, it tells us that those units were 20% completed. They were already 20% completed at the beginning of the month. So that means that 20% was done in July and there's 80% left to do in August. Our report is for the month of August. So we're only interested in what happened during August. So the beginning inventory was already 20% complete. We have 80% to do. For the ending inventory though, these units, remember, were started in the month of August. So if they're 42% complete, that means we did 42% of the work in August. Now in September, that ending inventory from August becomes the beginning inventory for September, and we'll have 58% more to do in September. So yeah, you have to be very careful what it's telling you. Is it telling you how much was done this month, or was it telling you how much was done in a previous period? Our report is just for the month ended in August, and so we need to figure out how much of this work was done in August. Does that make sense? Any other questions before we move on to step 3? So in step 3, we're looking for, this first row is the total costs that were added in August. And back up in the given information, it tells us direct materials $32.90 and conversion costs of $189. Wow. Nope, sorry. I was thinking, why are they so that? My apologies. Those numbers, I should have just turned my page over. Those numbers were just the beginning inventory. Those will go down here. These are at the top of my next page. Coffee beans added during August. That's what I was looking for. I was wondering why those numbers were so low. Thinking I must be overpaying for coffee if it's really that cheap. Coffee beans added during August, 14,300 pounds. Cost $65,780. That's what I should have been looking for. And then the next line down says conversion costs during August were $21,942. Pulling in our units from step 2, just above, and then dividing. Next piece is our cost summary. We start with those numbers that I was looking at on the previous page. The total for our beginning inventory was $34.79. And we added to it during the month the direct materials plus the conversion costs. It's the total of these two numbers. Total cost for August. When we include the beginning inventory, that means there were $91,201 that went through the roasting department work in process account during the month of August. And our job in the final step, in step 4, is to just say, where are these costs now at the end of the month? To complete the inventory and process, Alexis's rule tells us we don't have to add any direct materials, but we do have to add conversion costs. We added 560 units of conversion costs at $1.50. So the units from step 2 times the cost per unit here from step 3. For the units started and completed, that was 13,900 units from right here. And then we multiply for direct materials, we multiply that by $4.60. For conversion costs, we multiply by $1.50. And then just total across, and then add the beginning inventory. And then we go through that one more time for the ending inventory. Units from step 2, 400 units of direct materials, 168 units of conversion costs. We are out of time for today. So what we are going to do is move the chapter 17 exercises due date to Thursday. The chapter 17 problem will still remain due on Thursday, although as always, if you need a bit of extra time, you're welcome to take that. Please go ahead and try this last question, part B, on your own based on what you've already done in part A. I think you should be able to get those. We've done that same thing for the last couple exercises as well. And we can start there on Thursday if anyone has questions about the answers to part B. We'll pick up, finish up the chapter, and move on to chapter 18 on Thursday. Any questions before I stop recording?